The first time one of your ancestors was poisoned, there was no doctor to call, no antidote sitting in a cabinet, no clinical word for what was happening to their body. There was just the sudden wrongness of it. The burning, the nausea, the racing heart, the realization that something they had eaten or touched was trying to kill them from the inside. And here's what's fascinating. That moment, that specific terrifying experience, didn't just happen to one person. It happened to millions of people across millions of years. And the way prehistoric humans survived it, the biological systems they had developed, the knowledge they accumulated, the tools they eventually built from that knowledge, tells us something extraordinary about what it actually took to become human. Let's start with the body itself, because this is the part that changes everything. You are carrying, right now, roughly 25 different bitter taste receptors on your tongue. Scientists call them TAS2RS. They evolved specifically to detect plant toxins. When your distant ancestors put something in their mouths that contained alkaloids or other toxic compounds, those receptors fired immediately, triggering disgust, triggering the gag reflex, triggering the overwhelming urge to spit it out before it ever reached the stomach. This wasn't learned. This was biology. A system so ancient it predates modern humans by millions of years, already present in hominins who walked the landscape of Africa 4.7 million years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed in any recognizable form. But here's what's fascinating about how that system actually worked. It wasn't just bitter taste. Sourness triggered caution. Sweetness and umami signaled safety. The entire sensory architecture of your mouth was, and still is, fundamentally a toxin detection system wearing the costume of taste preferences. Your ancestors who couldn't detect dangerous compounds didn't survive long enough to pass their genes on. The ones who recoiled at bitterness, who spit before swallowing, who learned to associate certain smells and textures with danger, those were the ones who made it. Natural selection didn't give your ancestors a manual for navigating a world full of poisonous plants. It built the warning system directly into their bodies and then killed everyone who lacked it. And the world they were navigating was genuinely dangerous in ways that are hard to fully appreciate now. Early hominins in Africa were surrounded by plants that had evolved their own chemical defenses over hundreds of millions of years, compounds designed to make any animal that ate them deeply regret it. Alkaloids that attacked the nervous system, glycosides that disrupted heart rhythm, lectins that destroyed the lining of the digestive tract. These weren't rare exceptions in the ancient environment. They were everywhere, woven into berries and roots and leaves that might look identical to something safe from 3 feet away. The margin for error was essentially zero. Eating the wrong thing in the wrong quantity, far from any reliable water source with no one around who had survived the same mistake before, was frequently a death sentence. So what did prehistoric humans actually do when they were poisoned? In the early stages of hominin history, before language was sophisticated enough to transmit complex botanical knowledge, the answer was mostly just survive or don't. The body would attempt to expel the toxin through vomiting. Heart rate would spike. In severe cases, neurological symptoms would follow: confusion, paralysis, respiratory failure. Those who survived a mild poisoning event probably developed a powerful aversion to whatever caused it, an aversion so strong it may have been passed on to their children through behavioral teaching long before it could ever be encoded genetically. This is the part nobody talks about. Individual poisoning events weren't just personal catastrophes. They were expensive, sometimes fatal lessons that accumulated across generations into something that eventually resembled medical knowledge. Because here's what the archaeological record is beginning to reveal. By at least 60,000 years ago, prehistoric humans weren't just trying to avoid poisons. They were deliberately using them. Researchers excavating the Umhlatuzana rock shelter in KwaZulu-Natal, South Africa, found 5 quartz arrowheads still carrying chemical traces of a poison derived from a plant called gifbol, Boophone disticha, sometimes called the poisonous onion, a bulbous flowering plant in the same botanical family as cultivated onions and garlic. Using gas chromatography mass spectrometry, scientists identified the specific alkaloids, bufenidrine, and epibufenizin, still chemically intact after 60,000 years. And what makes this genuinely staggering is that researchers found the exact same chemical signature on 250-year-old bone arrowheads collected elsewhere in South Africa. An unbroken tradition of using the same poison, extracted from the same plant, applied with the same method, spanning at least 60,000 years of continuous human history. Think about what that actually required cognitively. To use gifbol as a hunting poison, your ancestors needed to know that a small quantity applied to an arrowhead would incapacitate a large animal not immediately but over time, that the toxin would affect the nervous and cardiovascular systems of the prey without spoiling the meat, that they needed to handle the preparation carefully enough to avoid poisoning themselves in the process. Understanding delayed consequences, applying abstract cause and effect reasoning across time, storing and transmitting that knowledge reliably across generations, that's not trial and error. That's something much closer to science. And it was happening 60,000 years ago, which means the underlying cognitive framework that made it possible was almost certainly in place long before that. But poisoning wasn't only something prehistoric humans inflicted on prey. The broader biological record shows that early hominins were also exposed to pathogens, to infectious agents that functioned as a different kind of toxin altogether. Molecular analysis of herpes simplex 2, for instance, suggests it crossed into the human lineage from another hominin species approximately 1.6 million years ago, meaning our ancestors were navigating exposure to viral pathogens on timescales that dwarf recorded history. Tuberculosis, leprosy, trypanomatosis, diseases once assumed to be products of agricultural civilization and animal domestication, are now understood to have roots reaching back into the Paleolithic, into the lives of people who had never seen a domestic animal and wouldn't for tens of thousands of years. The ancient body was constantly under chemical and biological assault from the environment it moved through, and every line of defense your immune system carries today was forged in that pressure. What makes all of this remarkable is the sheer compression of knowledge it represents. Between 4.7 million years ago and 60,000 years ago, hominins moved from a state of biological defensiveness, relying almost entirely on evolved sensory systems to avoid toxins, to something qualitatively different, an active, deliberate, transmittable understanding of how specific toxic compounds worked and how to weaponize them. That transition didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because of any single discovery. It happened through millions of individual encounters with dangerous plants and pathogens, millions of cases of illness and recovery and death, millions of behavioral adjustments that were gradually refined and passed forward. Every bitter taste your ancestors spit out, every toxic berry they learned to avoid, every plant they discovered could kill prey at a distance, it all fed into a body of knowledge that was accumulating long before anyone could write a single word of it down. And the gifbol arrowheads sitting in a museum archive, still carrying their 60,000-year-old chemical signature, are what's left of all that accumulated understanding. 5 small pieces of quartz that represent not just a hunting technique, but the endpoint of an extraordinarily long process of learning to survive in a world that was, in a very real chemical sense, actively trying to kill the people moving through it. Ethnographic records show that hunters across nearly every latitude on Earth eventually developed poisoned weapons, applying toxins derived from plants and occasionally animals to tips that would otherwise have been far less effective against large prey. The near universality of that practice suggests something important, that once prehistoric humans crossed the cognitive threshold required to understand and apply poison deliberately, the knowledge spread, persisted, and kept being refined across cultures and continents for tens of thousands of years after.